The Zwaxtharian food critic's third set of eyes bulged as she stared at the steaming bowl before her. In her centuries-long career reviewing restaurants across 12 galaxies, she had never encountered anything quite like this. The dish, something the human chef called mapo tofu, seemed to be moving. No, that was just the oils dancing across its crimson surface, creating an almost hypnotic effect under Space Station Unity's ambient lighting. Around her, the prestigious Silver Nebula food court had fallen silent. Every patron, whether they possessed 2 eyes or 20, was watching. This was, after all, the first time in the station's history that a human had been granted permission to operate a food stall among the galaxy's finest culinary establishments. Chen-Li wiped his palms on his apron, trying to maintain a professional demeanor despite his racing heart. Everything he'd worked for hinged on this moment. 3 years of paperwork, countless cultural sensitivity assessments, and rigorous quarantine protocols had led to this. The most influential food critic in the sector was about to taste his food. The critic lifted her sampling appendage, delicately acquiring a portion that, by human standards, would have been comically small. The entire food court seemed to hold its breath, those species that breathed, anyway. The moment the food touched her sensory organs, her crystalline skin began to glow with an intense purple light. Her secondary wings unfurled involuntarily, knocking over a glass of Centaurian spring water. The critic's assistant reached for their emergency medical beacon, but before they could activate it, the critic let out a sound that made every translator in the vicinity short-circuit. Chen's heart stopped. Was this it? Would his dream of sharing Earth's cuisine with the galaxy end in a diplomatic incident? But then the critic spoke, her voice resonating at frequencies that made the station's windows vibrate. By the ancestral nebulae, what is this sensation? This heat. This complexity. The molecular structure is dancing in my sensory cavity. She began to hover above her seat, her bioluminescence pulsing in rhythm with her words. Other patrons started backing away, their species' various fight-or-flight responses activating. Security drones zoomed toward the scene as the station's threat assessment AI registered the unusual energy signatures emanating from the critic's body. The last thing Chen saw before the emergency containment shield slammed down around his stall was the critic's face splitting into what he hoped was a smile, and not the prelude to molecular dissolution. The incident would later be known as the Sichuan situation, and it was only the beginning of Chen-Li's problems, and his opportunity to change the galaxy's culinary landscape forever. News traveled faster than light on Space Station Unity, especially when it involved a renowned Zwaxtharian food critic glowing like a supernova in the middle of the Silver Nebula food court. Within hours, Chen's small food stall had been quarantined behind 3 layers of containment fields, and his cooking equipment had been classified as potential biohazards. I don't understand, Chen explained for the 5th time to the station's safety committee. It's just a traditional Sichuan dish. The main ingredients are tofu, ground beef, and chili oil. He pulled up the recipe on his tablet, watching the committee members' various appendages twitch nervously as they reviewed the components. And this, capsaicin compound? The head of the committee, a gelatinous being named Administrator 2, wobbled disapprovingly. Our analysis shows it's a neurotoxin that directly stimulates pain receptors. That's technically true, Chen admitted. But humans have been eating it for thousands of years. It's perfectly safe. Safe for humans, perhaps, Tu rippled. But the critic's unusual reaction was incredible. A voice interrupted from the doorway. Everyone turned to see a tall, mantis-like figure in a maintenance uniform ducking through the entrance. Chen recognized him as VR9, the night shift worker who sometimes lingered around his stall during prep hours. Chief Engineer VR9, Tu acknowledged, multiple eyes narrowing. This is a closed hearing. With respect, Administrator, VR9 clicked his mandibles excitedly, I've been secretly sampling Chen's food for weeks. Small amounts, carefully documented. He produced a data crystal. I've been tracking the effects on my physiology. The results are fascinating. The committee burst into alarmed murmurs. Chen stared at VR9, realizing why his ingredient inventory had never quite matched his sales numbers. You've been experimenting on yourself? Tu's translucent form clouded with concern. Indeed. VR9's antennae quivered with enthusiasm. And I'm not the only one. There's an entire underground network of us. We call ourselves the Spice Seekers. Chen felt his chances of keeping his business license evaporating by the second. But before he could speak, his tablet chimed with an urgent message. His eyes widened as he read it. It's from the critic, he announced, his voice shaking. The room fell silent. She's demanding more food. Says she's never experienced such transcendent gustatory illumination in her entire career. She's offering to pay 10,000 credits for another bowl. Impossible. Tu wobbled violently. The medical team says she's still glowing. Actually, VR9 interjected, mandibles forming what Chen had learned to recognize as a grin. That's normal. The bioluminescence typically lasts 6 to 8 hours after consuming Chen's extra spicy dishes. We've started calling it the Sichuan Shine. Before the committee could respond, alarms blared throughout the station. Security feeds showed a crowd gathering outside Chen's quarantine stall, not protesters, but customers. Beings from across the galaxy, many of them highly ranked diplomats and officials, all demanding to experience this dangerous new human delicacy. This is unprecedented, Tu quivered. We need time to study the effects, establish protocols. Or, VR9 suggested, his compound eyes glinting, we could recognize that we're witnessing a historic moment in galactic cuisine. The critic's reaction wasn't a medical emergency, it was a breakthrough. As the committee argued, Chen's tablet kept chiming with more orders and interview requests. He thought about his grandmother's words when she first taught him to cook, good food brings people together, even when they don't speak the same language. He just hadn't expected people to include beings with crystalline skin and quantum digestive systems. The station's AI announced that a Zwaxtherian diplomatic vessel had just requested emergency docking clearance. Apparently, the critic had called her entire food review council. Chen looked at his hands, which still smelled of Sichuan peppercorns, and realized his small dream of opening a simple food stall might have just sparked a galactic culinary revolution. And judging by the growing crowd outside, it was only the beginning. 3 Mapo tofus, 2 Kung Pao chickens, and a secret menu ghost pepper challenge. VR9's antennae twitched as he passed Chen the encrypted data crystal containing the latest batch of orders. The Andromedans are particularly interested in the ghost pepper. Apparently, they've been live-streaming their reactions. Chen wiped his brow as he worked over his rebuilt cooking station, now hidden in a repurposed maintenance bay deep in the station's engineering sector. The past 2 weeks had transformed his simple food stall into the heart of an elaborate underground dining network. Station authorities had officially closed his business, and unofficially given him this space after the Zwaxtherian diplomatic corps threatened to relocate their entire embassy over the issue. How's the delivery system working? Chen asked, carefully measuring out spices. His original recipes had evolved, adapted for various alien physiologies. The Andromedans, with their silicon-based biology, could handle heat levels that would be lethal to most carbon-based life forms. Smooth as quantum foam, VR9 clicked happily. The maintenance drones are perfect for food delivery. Nobody questions their movements, and their temperature regulation systems keep the food at optimal serving conditions. Chen nodded, but his attention was drawn to the small sensor panel they'd installed near the entrance. A red light was blinking. Someone's coming. VR9 quickly activated the camouflage shields, transforming the kitchen into what appeared to be a routine maintenance area. They'd barely finished when the door slid open to reveal a tall, geometric figure whose crystalline form refracted the station's lighting into sharp, intimidating patterns. Chief Health Inspector Blacks, VR9 chittered nervously. "What brings you to engineering?" The inspector's facets gleamed as they stepped into the room. "Interesting energy signatures in this section. Our sensors detected thermal patterns consistent with cooking." Chen's heart raced. Blacks had been leading the official investigation into the human food incident since the beginning. Unlike the other authorities who'd been willing to look the other way, Blacks seemed to have a personal vendetta against Earth cuisine. "Routine maintenance," VR9 explained. "We're testing new thermal regulators for the station's life support systems." "Indeed." Black's crystalline form shifted, creating a sound like grinding glass. "Then you won't mind if I scan for contaminants?" Before either could respond, an alarm blared through the station. "Medical emergency in diplomatic quarter," the AI announced. "Unauthorized food reaction in progress." Black's form pulsed with vindictive satisfaction. "Ah. Right on schedule." Chen's blood ran cold. "What did you do?" "I merely arranged for some confiscated human spices to be analyzed in our lab. If some samples found their way into the diplomatic corps' food supply, well, that would certainly justify a station-wide ban on Earth cuisine, wouldn't it?" But as they watched the medical feed on the nearest screen, something unexpected happened. The emergency showed the entire Zwaxtharian embassy staff glowing in various brilliant colors, their crystalline forms refracting light in beautiful patterns as they moved in synchronized motions. "They're dancing?" VR9's mandibles dropped in shock. A new message flashed across the screen. "Breaking news. Zwaxtharian Cultural Authority declares human spice trance official art form, promises cultural exchange program." Black's form clouded with rage. "This is impossible. Those compounds should have triggered a diplomatic crisis." Or, came a melodious voice from behind them, "They've triggered a cultural revolution." The original food critic floated into the room, her crystalline form still faintly glowing from her latest meal. "Really, Blacks, did you think I wouldn't recognize your clumsy attempt at sabotage? Our species has been seeking new forms of sensory transcendence for millennia. And here we find it, in a humble human spice blend." Chen watched in amazement as Black's geometric form seemed to shrink. "But, the regulations, the safety protocols." The critic waved a crystalline appendage dismissively. "Already being rewritten. The Senate has fast-tracked new guidelines for interspecies cuisine. Which reminds me." She turned to Chen. "How would you like to be the first instructor at the newly established Galactic Culinary Institute?" As Black sputtered in crystalline outrage, Chen's tablet suddenly exploded with notifications. The critic's announcement had gone viral across the galactic net. Videos of glowing Zwaxtharians performing spice-induced dance ceremonies were being shared across thousands of worlds. "I think," Chen said slowly, looking at his small kitchen setup, "we're going to need a bigger restaurant." The critic's form sparkled with amusement. "My dear chef, you're going to need an entire academy." In the corner, forgotten for the moment, Black's form flickered with an emotion none of them noticed, not rage or frustration, but a deep, hidden longing, as the inspector remembered a taste they'd secretly sampled and could never quite forget. The spread of human cuisine represents an unprecedented threat to galactic health and safety standards. Black's crystalline form projected documents onto the chamber walls as the Station Security Council convened for an emergency session. "These spices are literally designed to cause pain. They trigger emergency responses in nearly every known species. And now, they're being celebrated?" In the observation gallery, Chen sat between VR9 and the Zwaxtharian critic, watching as his life's work was put on trial. The chamber was packed with representatives from across the station, many of them still faintly glowing from recent meals. "If I may, Inspector," a council member shaped like a sentient gas cloud pulsed, our research indicates these reactions are not harmful. In fact, preliminary studies suggest certain human spice compounds may have therapeutic applications. Black's facets darkened. Studies conducted by whom? The same Zwaxtherians who are now promoting spice trances as performance art? Actually, a new voice cut in, by me. A holographic projection appeared in the center of the chamber, showing a familiar geometric form sampling various human dishes in secret. The timestamp showed these recordings spanning months before the original incident. The chamber erupted in murmurs as Black's crystalline surface clouded with emotion. How did you get these? The Zwaxtherian critic floated forward. Your own medical monitoring system, Inspector. As required by station protocol, it recorded every meal you consumed. Including the human takeout you ordered under false credentials. Fascinating research logs, by the way. Your notes on the transcendent qualities of chocolate were particularly poetic. Chen watched in amazement as Black's geometric form began to flicker with colors they'd been trying to hide, the telltale signs of regular exposure to human spices. I was conducting official investigations, Black's insisted, but their voice wavered. Were you? The critic's form sparkled knowingly. Or were you trying to understand why your family's restaurant failed while human cuisine flourished? We looked into your background, Inspector. 3 generations of traditional crystalline cuisine, until changing tastes forced it to close. That must have been difficult. The chamber fell silent as Black's form pulsed with suppressed emotion. Our recipes were perfect. Mathematically precise. Molecularly balanced. How could humans, with their crude instruments and imprecise measurements, create something so alive? Chen stood up, finally understanding. That's what scares you, isn't it? Not that the food is dangerous, but that it's unpredictable. Every batch is slightly different. Every cook adds their own touch. It breaks all your rules about what food should be. It's chaos, Black's whispered. Beautiful, terrible chaos. The critic glided to Black's side. You know what we call that in artistic circles? Jazz. Innovation. Evolution. Her form brightened. Which is why we want both of you to help establish the curriculum for the new Culinary Institute. Both of us? Chen and Black's spoke simultaneously. Of course. Who better to teach molecular gastronomy than someone who understands both the precision of crystalline cuisine and the passion of human cooking? Your secret experiments with fusion dishes are exactly what we're looking for. The security feeds displayed across the chamber suddenly filled with images from across the station, aliens of all species gathering in dining halls, sharing meals, glowing in various colors as they experienced new flavors. Families and friends, drawn together by the simple act of sharing food. This is more than just cuisine, the critic continued. This is diplomacy. Culture. Connection. Inspector, your family restaurant failed because it couldn't adapt. But now you have the chance to be part of something new. Something that honors tradition while embracing change. Black's form shifted, revealing layers of color they'd been hiding. I have been working on a recipe. A fusion of crystalline precision and human spicing techniques. I call it quantum chili. Chen stepped forward. I'd be honored to try it. As Black's form brightened with surprise and hope, alerts began flooding the chamber's screens. Word of the hearing had spread across the galaxy. Restaurant chains, cooking schools, and diplomatic missions were all demanding to be part of the culinary revolution. And in a small kitchen deep in the station's engineering sector, a pot of mapo tofu still simmered, its spices bridging the gap between worlds in ways no one had ever imagined possible. And that's how you achieve the perfect balance of numbing and spicy, Chen explained to the eager faces before him, some humanoid, others decidedly not. The classroom in the newly established Galactic Culinary Institute was packed with students from across the known universe. In the front row, a cluster of young Zwaxtharians practiced manipulating their crystalline forms to better process different spice combinations. Remember, he continued, cooking isn't just about following recipes. It's about understanding why ingredients work together. It's about, he paused as one of his students, a gaseous being, suddenly changed color from blue to brilliant orange. Sorry, chef, the student rippled apologetically. I got excited and absorbed too much capsaicin vapor at once. Actually, Black's geometric form shimmered as they entered the classroom. That reaction is perfectly natural. In fact, we're discovering that different species' responses to human spices can tell us more about xenobiology than 1,000 traditional scans. The former inspector, now the Institute's professor of molecular gastronomy, had transformed from Chen's greatest opponent into one of human cuisine's most passionate advocates. But not everyone was celebrating this cultural revolution. This is an outrage. The transmission from the Conservatory of Traditional Galactic Cuisine filled the classroom's holoscreen. First, these human flavors corrupt our youth, and now they're rewriting our very understanding of gastronomy? What's next, suggesting that food should be enjoyed rather than simply consumed for optimal nutritional intake? Chen noticed several of his students trying to hide their glowing forms, the now familiar sign of recent human food consumption. Even among species that claimed to oppose Earth cuisine, there was a growing underground appreciation for these new flavors. Speaking of enjoyment, Blacks interjected, their crystalline surface rippling with barely contained excitement. The results from the medical survey are in. The regular consumption of human spices has been linked to increased social bonding across species barriers, improved diplomatic relations, and, most surprisingly, enhanced empathic capabilities in typically non-empathic species. The angry traditionalists on the holoscreen sputtered. That's impossible. Food is fuel, nothing more. Is it? The Zwaxtharian critic floated into the classroom, her form glowing with what Chen now recognized as the specific luminescence produced by his extra-spicy hot pot. Then explain why, since the introduction of human cuisine, cross-species adoption rates have increased by 300%? Why trade disputes are being resolved over shared meals? Why even the notoriously solitary Quantum Collective has started hosting dinner parties? She projected a series of images into the air, an Andromedan silicon-based family sharing spicy noodles with their adopted carbon-based child. A group of traditionally warring species negotiating peace terms over plates of Kung Pao chicken, even the mysterious Quantum Collective, their probability clouds condensing just enough to handle chopsticks. This isn't just about food, Chen realized, watching his students' reactions. It's about breaking down barriers. When we share a meal, when we experience new flavors together, we're reminded that despite our different biologies, we can find common ground. Precisely why it must be stopped, the traditionalists insisted. These human methods are disrupting thousands of years of carefully regulated consumption protocols. Black's form suddenly blazed with color. Like the protocols that drove my family's restaurant out of business? That valued sterile precision over living tradition? Perhaps some protocols need disrupting. The debate was interrupted by an urgent news alert. The Galactic Council had just passed the Universal Right to Culinary Expression Act, officially protecting the rights of all species to explore and share their traditional cuisines. The legislation had passed with unprecedented support, backed by a coalition of worlds that had discovered new connections through shared meals. As the traditionalists' transmission cut off in crystalline humps and gaseous sighs, Chen looked around his classroom. Every being there represented a different world, a different biology, a different cultural tradition. Yet here they were, united by the simple human act of cooking and sharing food. One of the Zwaxtharian students raised an appendage. Chef Chen. Is it true what they say? That on Earth, important moments in life are always marked by sharing meals? Chen smiled, remembering countless family dinners, celebrations, and even moments of mourning, all centered around the kitchen table. Food is how we show love, how we welcome strangers, how we turn them into family. And now, he gestured to the diverse beings before him, many of them still glowing from their latest culinary experiments. That family has grown bigger than anyone on Earth could have imagined. Black's form shimmered with what Chen had learned to recognize as joy. Perhaps that's what the traditionalists really fear. Not that we're losing our cultural identities, but that we're gaining new ones. Becoming more than we were. As if to prove their point, alarms began chiming throughout the station, not emergency alerts, but dinner bells, calling beings of all species to gather, to share, to connect over flavors that transcended the boundaries of biology and culture. The revolution wasn't just culinary anymore. It was evolutionary. The Grand Galactic Culinary Competition was meant to be a celebration, a showcase of how far interstellar cuisine had come since Chen's first bowl of mapo tofu set the galaxy alight. Instead, it had become a battlefield. This is a formal protest. The delegation from the Conservatory of Traditional Galactic Cuisine materialized in the center of the station's massive exhibition hall, their various forms radiating disapproval. We demand the immediate cessation of all human-influenced cooking practices. Chen stood at his cooking station, surrounded by students from the institute. Behind him, hundreds of beings from across the galaxy had gathered to compete, their cooking implements ranging from traditional flame burners to quantum probability ovens. On what grounds? Black's crystalline form shimmered with barely contained irritation. They had spent months organizing this event, seeing it as the perfect way to showcase how traditional techniques could blend with new innovations. The conservatory's leader, a being composed of pure energy contained within an ancient ceremonial suit, stepped forward. We have evidence that human cuisine is causing irreversible changes to galactic society. Species are deviating from their traditional consumption patterns. Cultural boundaries are dissolving. The very fabric of our civilizations is being transformed by these flavor anarchists. Good, came a quiet voice from the crowd. Everyone turned to see the Zwaxtherian critic floating forward, but she wasn't alone. Behind her came beings from every corner of the galaxy, families, diplomats, workers, all still faintly glowing from their latest meals at the institute. Good, the conservatory leader crackled with indignation. You call this chaos good? I call it evolution, the critic replied. But perhaps we should let the food speak for itself. She gestured to the cooking stations. You fear what human cuisine represents. Then compete. Show us why the old ways are better. Or are you afraid that your perfectly regulated recipes can't stand up to a little chaos? The challenge hung in the air like the aroma of sizzling spices. The conservatory leaders huddled, their forms flickering with uncertainty. Finally, their leader turned back. Very well. One competition. Traditional techniques versus this new, fusion approach. The winner will determine the future of galactic cuisine. Chen felt the weight of countless eyes upon him, compound, crystalline, quantum, and more. But before he could step forward, Black's moved to his side. If we're testing old versus new, Black's form rippled, then let us compete together. After all, isn't that the whole point? Not erasing tradition, but building on it. The next 3 hours transformed the exhibition hall into a symphony of sizzling, steaming, and molecular reconstruction. Chen and Black's moved in perfect harmony, their stations merged into one. Traditional crystalline precision combined with human intuition as they created something entirely new. The conservatory team worked with mathematical perfection, their dishes emerging as flawless representations of classical techniques. Each plate was identical, each flavor calculated to the quantum level. When the time came for judging, the hall fell silent. The panel included representatives from every major species, their sensory organs primed to detect every nuance. The traditional dishes earned nods of appreciation. They were exactly what everyone expected, executed without flaw. Then came Chen and Black's creation. They called it quantum mapo tofu, a dish that combined the precision of crystalline cuisine with the unpredictable joy of human spices. Each portion was similar but unique, adapted to the biology of whoever ate it while maintaining its essential character. The first judge, a being of pure thought, actually manifested a physical form just to better experience the flavors. The second, a temporal specialist, reported tasting the past and future of cuisine simultaneously. The quantum collective representatives split into multiple probability states, each experiencing a different aspect of the dish. But it was the reaction of the conservatory's leader that shocked everyone. As they sampled the dish, their energy form began to pulse with colors no one had ever seen them display. The ancient ceremonial suit, unchanged for millennia, started to adapt and shift. Their voice wavered. This tastes like home, Chen finished softly. But also like something new. That's what food is supposed to do, comfort us with the familiar while exciting us with possibilities. The leader's form stabilized, but the colors remained. We have spent so long preserving our traditions that we forgot why they existed in the first place. Not to restrict us, but to bring us together. Black's crystalline surface caught the light like facets of a diamond. Then perhaps it's time for a new tradition. One that celebrates both where we come from and where we're going. Around them, the crowd began to glow, not just the Zwaxtherians this time, but beings of all species, their forms reflecting the simple joy of sharing something wonderful together. The competition wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about proving that the best traditions aren't frozen in time, they grow, adapt, and bring new flavors to life. 5 years had passed since the Grand Galactic Culinary Competition, and Space Station Unity had never been the same. The once sterile Silver Nebula food court had transformed into a vibrant marketplace of flavors and cultures that humans would have recognized from their own planet's ancient bazaars and night markets. Chen stood at the window of his office in the Galactic Culinary Institute, watching vessels arrive from across the universe. Each ship brought new students, new ingredients, and new possibilities. Below, the evening food festival was beginning, the station's lights dimming to better display the natural bioluminescence of happy diners. Admiring your legacy? The Zwaxtherian critic floated up beside him, her crystalline form refracting the colors of countless glowing patrons below. Our legacy, Chen corrected, turning as Blacks entered the office. The former inspector's geometric form had evolved over the years, developing facets that could shift to express emotions as complex as their fusion recipes. The latest enrollment figures are in, Blacks announced, their form sparkling with pride. We're now the most diverse educational institution in known space. Even the Quantum Collective is sending a probability cluster to study classical human comfort food. Chen smiled, remembering how it all started with one small food stall and a bowl of mapo tofu. And the traditional programs? Thriving, the critic answered. It turns out that when you stop treating cuisine as a battleground and start seeing it as a bridge, everyone wins. The conservatory's new Evolution of Taste curriculum is their most popular course. Their conversation was interrupted by a gentle chime. The office wall transformed into a viewing screen, displaying a familiar kitchen on Earth. Chen's grandmother sat in her favorite chair, surrounded by a mix of human and alien children, all wearing junior chef aprons. Ready for today's lesson, Master Chen? His grandmother asked with a twinkle in her eye. After the success of the institute, she'd agreed to teach a special class on Earth grandmother wisdom that had become surprisingly popular across the galaxy. Actually, Papa, I thought today Blacks could teach them about the mathematics of marinades. Some of our quantum physics students have been experimenting with your red braised pork recipe. Black's form brightened as they stepped forward. Did you know that the ratio of soy sauce to rice wine in your grandmother's recipe exactly matches the golden mean? We've been studying how classical Earth cooking techniques accidentally achieved molecular perfection through intuition alone. The children, human and alien alike, leaned forward eagerly. There was something magical about watching a crystalline being explain the science behind comfort food to a group of youngsters who saw nothing strange about their teacher's geometric form. But remember,